Hey guys, this is Base Bear here. I don't typically make videos, but I came across a project, something that I wanted to test, that I found out that there's little to no data for it on the internet. And that's is having a radiator in the front as a exhaust instead of an intake. Like you find plenty of people that have a radiator in the front as a intake fan, plenty where people have a radiator at the top of the case as an exhaust. But I never seen people do it the other way around. And there might be situations where you would want to do this. Like in my situation, I'm running the Corsair 4000D. In that case, only supports a front radiator fan, and the bottom doesn't have any ability to put like any additional intake fans. So if I wanted to put a radiator in the front, I would have to do it as like 99.9% of people and have it as a intake fan, which is a bad idea because if you've seen J2 Sense, if you've seen Gamer Nexus, you generally pull heat into your case, which yes, you do get like slightly lower CPU temps, which is about what, maybe 3-4 degrees at best Celsius. But you risk running the components in your case slightly hotter. And I don't know, I just wasn't a fan of that. In my normal build, I have a exhaust, out at the top, and that works pretty well. But I never have seen many people talking about having the exhaust as the front. So after looking on the internet, finding little to no data for it, I decided to, well, do it myself. And in my case, I'm going to be doing a comparison between running the radiator at the top of the case as an exhaust and the back fan also as an exhaust with three fans in the front doing intake versus the reverse, having the back as an intake, the top as an intake, and having the radiator at front as an exhaust with an additional fan right above it, because it's a 240 millimeter radiator. But I wanted to keep the same setup in the reverse, three fans in, three fans out, just like I had it when the exhaust was at top. So I just, took a fan, put it up top above it. Um, One thing to note in the case of my testing, which actually gives a handicap to the top exhaust, but as you're gonna see, it's not really gonna matter, impact it much for temps, if at all, and benchmark scores as well. I had to place the radiator slightly below the CPU block, which is a no-no when I am exhausting through the front, and it doesn't really like affects temps that much in terms of a margin of error, um, as much as you would think in terms of the data. And also, my GPU, when running the RAD as an exhaust in the front, in order to install it to the front, I had to move the graphics card down to the furthest PCIe slot, and it caused temps to go up for the GPU about like 4 degrees. But other than that, the benchmark scores are really relative, in between each other. All right, for the test build, we're running a 4000D Corsair case with a 240 millimeter radiator, AIO. And we're also running a 3070 Ti Founders Edition for the card. Now, the reason I wanted to do a specifically this CPU, and I didn't want to do one like the 140, not 40, but 14900K, is because I wanted to use one that was easier to control the heat on. because I didn't want to get a processor that just automatically ran significantly hotter than others. I wanted to get something that was easier to more so control, so you can see more fluctuations, or it's easier to see like, hey, this CPU doesn't just run hot. This is like a difference in between actual temps that would make more of a bigger difference. But in this case, as you're gonna see with the results, that there's not really much of a difference. All right, so right off the bat, we're gonna be looking at the benchmarks for 3D Mark, Geekbench, multi-core, Geekbench single core, and Cinebench. If you look at 3D Mark, literally the front exhaust is maybe 30 points lower than the top exhaust, which honestly could be within a margin of error. The Geekbench and the situation of the front exhaust is slightly higher, slightly lower in the multi-core, but slightly higher in the single core score. But again, all this is within a margin of error. Even the Cinebench, for the front exhaust, you're running a score of 596 versus the top exhaust score of a 611. Again, all within a margin of error. There's no like drastic difference between the two in terms of performance. And even when we go over to the Blender benchmarks, the front exhaust does like slightly better by like 1 point and a decimal. And again, even in the classroom scene, the junk scene, and the monster scene is really maybe 1 to 2 points difference. But it's not really a giant leap or decrease in performance, and that actually is in the favor of the front exhaust. But let's get to the meat of things, the temps. Even for the front exhaust, again, remember with the front exhaust, the 260 millimeter rad is actually slightly angled below the CPU water block. So remember that. And even with that being a thing, there is only a 2-degree difference Celsius in Blender. For 3D Mark, that is the GPU, so there's not a test on the CPU. And again, with the GPU, with that situation, I had to move the card down. Literally, I had to move it like down to the lowest slot. And the card I'm using is a 3070 Ti Founders Edition that has a fan on the top as intake and a fan on the bottom as intake. So if it being all the way down on the lowest PCIe slot, it actually has some of the air kind of not necessarily blocked off, but it's not getting the same airflow it originally was in the first test. So that's why you see that 4-degree difference. But even then, it actually got like maybe 30, I believe it was 30, 40 points difference in between the two scores for 3D Mark. So again, that degree difference is negligible and is only in my situation. If you can, have it front exhaust without having to compromise the positioning of your car, then you really want to run into that. And I'm pretty sure it'll be nearly identical. Geekbench, both of them, the highest temperature it reached was about 53 degrees Celsius. And in Cinebench, running at front exhaust, it was only about a 4-degree difference in terms of what it peaked at, which is at 60 degrees Celsius. So again, nearly identical within the margin of error. Okay, so what does this mean? Is that all that doomsday talk that you're going to get severely degraded performance, that you're going to get severely higher temps, is just not true, or at least from my testing scenario. Because as long as you make sure that you have the proper fan set up and that you have positive or neutral air pressure, then in comparison with the front exhaust and top exhaust, you're looking at identical performance, and that's actually pretty breathtaking to see. Because if you are in a situation where you run during okay, edit that out. If you're in a situation where you are running a budget build that only allows you to run a front 360 millimeter radiator, that is actually doable as an exhaust without you having degraded performance or significantly higher temps for your CPU. So, hey, the data's there, and before anyone gets in the comments and says, well, actually, I didn't, you run the test, collect the data, present it, I'm all for it. Matter of fact, if you want to get J2 Cents, Linus, Gamers Nexus to get in on this, please, because I want the data out there. I want more of these tests done. I want this to be more of a conversation, because guess what? Nobody talks about it. But, hey, if you enjoyed this video, like the content, anything, just let me know. I may or may not do more videos like this. It's a lot of work. Shout out to any YouTube channel that does these types of videos, because yeah, it's a lot of work. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you have any questions.